All right, so I'm going to start off using my magic wand here to send good luck to the demo gods, because I'm trying something totally new today with how I present WebVR, and I hope that it's going to be really fun. So if you all could do me a favor and smile, I'm going to disappear for a second. Awesome. Thank you. That was perfect. So I started this last week and decided that from now on my starting thing is going to be taking a picture of the audience, because one of my favorite things about VR is how it helps us relate to each other. I'm going to talk about that more, but for now, I'm going to start actually with a quote that I found last night on Twitter that I think really captures my feelings about the VR web. Yes, it's good. We're good. And so that is, 2D websites must fit on computer screens. 3D websites can contain life-size mountains you can actually climb. So I was browsing Twitter last night, as I think a lot of us probably do, and I saw this and I was like, that is probably the perfect kind of encapsulation of why the 3D and immersive web is so exciting to me. So I mentioned I'm going to do things a little bit differently this time around, so I've actually made these my only 2 slides. So we're done with the slides for now. I'm going to go ahead and launch a WebVR site that I decided to build last week when I thought, what could be better than getting on stage and actually doing a WebVR talk in WebVR? And it looks like it's going to work out right now. So we'll see how my computer handles showing this on a giant screen for 40 minutes. But as Kenneth said, I'm Liv. I am a virtual and augmented reality developer evangelist at Microsoft based out of San Francisco, which means my job is basically that I get to play with all of the cool technology that's being released right now and build little demos and then go talk to people about how I did that and how I made it work and why they should be excited about it. It is every bit as cool of a job as it sounds. So this WebVR site, you can see my wonderful game design graphics experience in this, is built on AFrame, which I'll talk about in just a second. But I want to start off by asking, how many of you are already working on VR applications yourself? Awesome. This is probably then going to inspire some of you, I hope, to start joining the group of, I think, the 3 of us that were here. So I'm going to talk to you today about the VR web, what I'm really excited about with the VR web, and why I think that you should be too. Then I'm going to go into getting meta here, how I built my presentation for the VR web, and show you a couple of other examples that I've been building and talk a little bit more about why I think it's a really important path for virtual reality distribution. I might be kicking some wires. I apologize if that was me. So we're going to start off on our little journey here and cover some VR devices. So I'm wearing one right now. I'm not putting it on my face because I like seeing all of your faces. But right now we have 2 major categories that virtual reality devices fall into. And this is probably being way too general, because I already know of like five different VR things that don't fall cleanly into one of these 2 categories. But to get a sense of what people are developing for and using today, 2 of these categories tends to cover the majority of consumer devices. So the one that you see on my head right now is a mobile VR device. This is a VR headset that is powered by a smartphone. So I can actually just pop this out right here. This is a Samsung phone. Samsung Gear VR is what I'm wearing. And if you've never tried VR and you want to try this one on later, come find me, because I will do demos for it. The thing that sets mobile VR apart is how portable it is, how easy it is to kind of just pick up your phone and stick it into a headset. The headset may contain specialized hardware like this one does. This has a touchpad on the side here that contains some other gesture controls, a tap. It's got some other buttons in there. It's got some specialized sensors. And essentially what I just do is run everything off of my phone. So it's a normal smartphone apps that are just rendering everything stereoscopically, basic stuff. And then we just pop that in here. So if you're familiar with the cardboard headsets, that's about the basic headset that you can get for mobile VR. And that's quite literally a piece of cardboard with 2 lenses in it, and you have your very first VR device. On the other end of the spectrum, you have more powerful computing devices like VR devices that are powered by a desktop computer. So this here is a picture of the HTC Vive. This type of device gets plugged into and is powered by a desktop computer. It usually has its own standalone graphics card, and it's significantly more powerful. The display isn't something separate like the mobile phone. It's contained in the device, and you get all these other fun peripherals that are coming out, like the ability to do room scale tracking or have hand controllers. Of course, as I mentioned, there's a few other things about VR devices that don't really cleanly fall into one of these categories. You have standalone devices that contain all of the stuff required to run your virtual reality app, and that's just all contained in the headset itself, so you pick it up, put it on, and go. And you also have non-head-mounted display VR experiences, like caves, that project virtual environments onto walls around you so that you're actually standing inside of something instead of wearing a device on your face, although we all know that this is like the best fashion statement so far. So moving on a little bit, the big question that I hear a lot is, well, okay, why VR? And the first thing that I like to say about this is it's really fun. It's a technology that is just really, really fun to play with. I don't usually give advice to people that is what I did when I was deciding to follow my passion for VR, which was make a huge life-changing decision based off of a YouTube video that you're watching one night. And that's exactly what I did. So I had moved to Silicon Valley back in 2013, and about a year after that, I was looking around and I saw a whole bunch of people were really, really passionate about what they were working on. And people would be like, well, what are you passionate about? And I was like, I like ice cream, I guess. I didn't think about what I was working on as something that I should be passionate about. So I set off on this quest to go find it. And it felt very, very big and very like, all right, I'm going to go and find something world-changing, and I'm going to change the world in 2 weeks because that's what people do, right? And so I was watching YouTube, and I saw a YouTube video from someone who was talking about the DK2 that had just been released from Oculus. And as I was watching this, my room got brighter. I was like, literally the room got brighter. And I was like, this is a sign. This is what I need to be working on for the rest of my life. It doesn't matter that I don't have any graphics experience. It doesn't matter that I've never even worn a VR headset before. This is what I'm going to be doing the rest of my life. I think what more likely is one of my roommates probably turned a light switch on, but it doesn't matter because I really love where I am today, and I see VR as this kind of new medium. So the next week, I went to a meetup group in the Bay Area called Silicon Valley Virtual Reality, and there's no one really there other than the people who are getting set up, because I showed up like 20 minutes early, as I tend to do when I'm really excited about something. And someone saw me kind of just standing there. I was like, hey, have you ever tried this? And I was like, no. And he's like, do you want to? And I was like, of course I do. And so I put on this headset, and the first thing that I see are lightsabers in front of me. And I have been a huge Star Wars fan my entire life. So the fact that I put on this headset, I see that I'm literally stepping into a world that I've dreamed about being a part of since I was about 5 years old. That really kind of hit home to me that virtual reality, one, it's here and it's feasible today. And it's also just a very, very powerful medium for being able to create experiences that have previously only existed in our imaginations or on a 2D screen that we're watching from afar. We're no longer observing media with VR. We're actually participating in that, and it's taking things to an entirely new level. So one thing that I hear a lot is like, well, okay, I understand why this is important for games, but what else kind of can you do with VR? And virtual reality has so much more than gaming in its potential, even though that's kind of a natural progression from where experiencing and participating in media comes from. So one of the big things about VR, like I said, when I was kind of taking the picture, is that it changes the way that we relate to each other. So this is me from about 4 months ago. And I was on vacation with my parents. These are my parents. And I took this 360 picture with my Gear VR. And that chair right there was for my sister, who wasn't able to come with me to visit them in the summer. And I was able to, through VR, kind of capture this exact moment in time of when I went back to visit my parents, that I can put on this experience in a headset and just revisit it whenever I want. And for me, that's a really powerful way to relate to people that I don't get to see all the time since I moved across the country. And it's also a way that my sister could experience this from afar. So when I took a picture earlier today, if you've never been on stage, but you want to, you now have a way that you can go find out exactly what it feels like to be me standing on the stage right now. In a way that you can turn around and see the slides behind you. You can see the audience in front of you, and when you turn around, there's all sorts of different things going on. And that's just kind of one aspect of it, because virtual reality is also changing the way that we relate to technology. I see spreadsheets, and I kind of just gloss over that. I'm like, okay, that's a bunch of numbers. It maybe makes sense. I don't really remember what I read when I'm looking at a bunch of different numbers and columns. But if I see that data represented to me in 3D, it's more intuitive, it's more natural, and I start to understand and relate to that data as if it's a physical entity in my space. And that's really powerful as we start to think about the implications of taking all of this information that we know to be true and figuring out new ways to express that so that people understand it and can relate to it better and consider it more important than it might be now. You'll see an example of this in just a couple of minutes when I show you a few of the things that I've built, but at its core, 3D computing and immersive computing in general is going to fundamentally just change the way that we're interacting with all of this information that we've been building up to over the past several decades. So looking at that in particular, we'll move on to why VR in the browser? Why VR on the web? So at its core right now, the VR ecosystem, there's a ton of different ways that you can be building experiences, and there's a lot of different ways you can be distributing experiences, and having the web as a central place for virtual reality applications is very powerful in content creators being able to show their experiences in a way that they find best for their experience. We're in this interesting part of kind of the life cycle of virtual reality where an application for VR may or may not fit into something that's been previously categorized on an app store. There's one virtual reality experience. It was like a 6-minute demo of a news experience that had just happened a couple of years ago, and it was like a really beautiful short piece about a very, very specific event in time, and it was rejected by the app stores because it was not a full-length game. It wasn't a full-length experience, and they weren't able to distribute their content for that medium. And so when we look at the web in how it stands today, we start to see a lot of freedom in terms of how people are distributing their content. Additionally, you have this ability now to offload a lot of the processing power to the browser and just say, I don't want to know what kind of device I'm running on. I don't care if it's this desktop headset, if this mobile headset. I just want it to work. And with browser-based VR and WebVR today, you're able to start looking at your experience from the design perspective and say, okay, I have this application idea. I want to build it. I want it to run anywhere. I want anybody to be able to access it without having to go through a download process. I don't really want to differentiate between a mobile experience or a desktop experience because I'm building something that will work for either. I want to focus on designing a really beautiful application and experience that will run anywhere. And so that's where the browser-based VR comes in. So the WebVR API is an experimental API that allows the browser to handle all of the transformational aspects of your VR devices. So it doesn't, you as a developer don't have to worry about handling what type of device people are using, whether they're using a VR device at all. The different types of devices, like is this a mobile device? Is it a desktop device? None of that really matters with WebVR because the browser is going to sit there and it's going to calculate all of this for you and essentially update camera controls on your behalf in a WebGL scene. The cool thing about this is that if you put in a Bluetooth keyboard to your phone, this site, you could walk around in this on your phone too, wearing it on your face in a cardboard application, as a cardboard application. Or you can view it as I'm viewing it right now, not in VR mode, because I don't have a device plugged into this computer right now, and not in, but if I did have a device plugged in, I could also move in and out of that, and I didn't have to write any of that code myself. It's something that the browser can detect. Right now, it's supported in Firefox Nightly and certain builds of Chromium, but it's slated to hit major browsers towards the end of this year. The dates I'm not going to tell you because I'm going to mess them up, and then you're going to be like, you didn't know what you were talking about. But it's coming soon to be able to work on these browsers and just be a natural part of how we experience the web. So for me, that's really cool because I want to be thinking about the content that I'm distributing more than I want to think about handling edge cases, about what types of phone people may be using, whether or not it works on one specific experience, not having to rewrite the logic of switching in and out of VR mode cleanly and how that gets rendered. All of that's taken care of for me using the WebVR framework. And on the top of that, there's also a lot of tools that are being developed for web development around virtual reality experiences, like the one that I built this app in, which is called AFrame. And because we're having this ecosystem being built on top of this very experimental API, it's super easy to start building these experiences. So I have a little disclaimer that I like to say. I've only been developing JavaScript for about a year and a half. And I specifically started diving deeper into web development as it relates specifically to VR development, because I think that the web is an incredibly powerful platform for distributing immersive applications and democratizing people's ability to build VR applications as well as access them. So I built this without having a ton of specific JavaScript knowledge in about a week, and that was a week traveling. So I wasn't able to work on it full time. That's why the graphics are, as beautiful as they are. I spent so much time on those. But the truth is, you can start building really powerful applications today using these technologies. So if we look a little bit deeper into kind of the WebVR ecosystem, is this even remotely readable? It is a little bit readable. All right, no worries. I'll show this in a little bit more detail later on. But what I have here is an application that I wrote using Three.js on top of the WebVR boilerplate library. And this essentially, right here, make sure you can kind of see where the mouse cursor is. It grabs a renderer, and it's just a normal WebGL renderer. And it's handling the window size. It's creating the canvas so that it has something to create. If you're familiar with Three.js, this is just a normal Three.js scene. And it isn't even until we get a few more lines down here. We have a regular camera. We have a regular camera positioning. And it's not until we get to the controls here that we even start to look at how this is applied for a VR case specifically. And so what we're doing is we're actually adding specific VR controls to our camera that's saying, hey, you may be in a browser that's listening for hardware from the VR devices. You're then going to go into the VR effect, which is saying, in some cases, if you're rendering in VR, you probably should render this side by side, stereoscopically, so that people aren't just looking at some broken thing in front of them, like, what is this? And then lastly, you have a VR manager, which is part of the WebVR boilerplate framework that says sometimes you need to switch in and out of VR mode. One of the coolest applications that I'm really excited for is when online shopping sites start to add functionality for WebVR support, because I wanted to pull this up before I came in. I didn't have Wi-Fi. Is that there is another thing that I saw yesterday on Twitter was a picture of an Amazon product, and it's a tiny little desk, and it's a desk made for like dolls. And it has like 1.5-star reviews because nobody looks at the dimensions of this desk before they buy it. And so they buy this desk set, and it's like this big. And they're like, what did I just buy? So you can see there, if they had an ability to just click on something that would immediately say, okay, here's what this looks like in the full scale, you're immediately not going to have that problem anymore. And you won't be buying doll furniture when you're trying to decorate your office. After we look at those controls here, and it's a little bit blurry, and I apologize for that, we start to look at some of the different functionality of this experience. And so what this is a picture of is this is actually an application that I built to parse Excel graphs and chart them in 3D. And I'll show you a video of this in just a second. But we're just using regular JavaScript and jQuery in this. And I create a JSON object from that Excel data. I parse through it. And then instead of displaying it in a 2D graph sitting on the screen in front of me, I generate 3D objects that I can walk around in. So there's some pretty powerful stuff that you can get from even pretty basic data when it's standing in front of you, kind of literally. And if we look at this, I'm going to go ahead and play a quick little video. And something got a little bit mixed up there, so you just have to bear with me here. This is the website. And as you can see, I can start with this in a regular browser on my phone, and you can see here that it's then displaying these charts in 3D. And when I switch into VR mode, it starts rendering everything side by side. I didn't have to write this specifically. I didn't have to do anything special other than what I just showed you, those I think 4 lines of extra code to be able to have this working properly. And this is housing prices in different cities in the US relative to one another. And San Francisco is a little bit rough right now. So I spoiled my whole you can learn more, and it seems to have changed where it's sitting right now. So you can't actually see the full URL. But that's okay, because I'll bring it up later on. So I want to take some time now to go into the code behind this project. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up and show you a little bit about how I built the talk that you just saw. So I have a few pages here. Generally, this is not a super long application. It's a little bit less than 200 lines of code written entirely in markup-styled language. This is AFrame. GitHub thinks it's all HTML. It's pretty straightforward to use if you're familiar with HTML. So right at the start, and I don't know if there's a way to make this bigger. There is a way to make it bigger. Success. Cool. So at the start, it's just like a normal website. It's actually just like a normal website all the way through. I load in AFrame, which is the library that I was using to create all of these things. I load in an extended component that Kevin Yo wrote. He wrote a text component file, so I can actually add the text in that you could see. I created a separate script to handle all of the JavaScript that's going on the page, and it's not a lot. And then I imported a font, because it looks prettier than the regular font that came default. So once I do that, all of the joy of this VR application on the web comes from this A-scene component. And that's that's AFrame saying everything in here needs to be rendered in a WebGL canvas. And it's wrapping around Three.js. So I showed you how I created that in JavaScript in a previous application, but this one's just abstracting all of that out for me. And then the first thing I'm going to do when I'm building this application is I'm going to set up my assets. So with that, I have a few of the pictures that you saw. I've got a couple pictures of the VR devices, a few logos. I have a few skyboxes that I used to switch in and out of that scene when I was showing you the 360 photo. I've got the video that I played for you. And then I have something called a mix-in, which is something used in AFrame that allows you to create kind of reusable components, in this case, a font that I could apply to all of my text objects in the scene. Once I've defined all of my assets, I go in and, just like before, I set up a camera, this time using an A camera component. You'll notice a trend that all of these AFrame components start with A. That's very nice of them. And I start defining things around my scene. So in my scene, there were two different types of components. There was generally a collection of objects that displayed a specific thing I was talking about, either my intro scene, why you should care about VR, the code, the video. And with that, I created a stage. So this was something that was going to say everything that sticks around for all of the application is in this stage. So with that, I had the ability to create some paths with these boxes. And I wrapped that up in something called an A entity, which is something I can define as being its own object and say, this is an entity called a path. If I define that in the assets, I could reuse it. And it's just made up of a couple of boxes with specific positioning. I then made my gorgeous trees by sticking some cones on top of cylinders. And I added those to the stage as well. And again, I'm just finding these as entities so that if I would want it to go in and reproduce this experience in a bigger one, I could kind of just save that into an asset and say, okay, when I say I want to make a tree, this is what I mean by making a tree. It's incredibly extensible, and using kind of entity and components together, you can create some really interesting 3D objects and experiences past the primitives that come included. I stole the clouds from the AFrame website. I will be honest about that. But I essentially just created a couple of boxes that float along slowly. And they do this by using this A animation attribute. And it's pretty straightforward to write animations. You say, I'm making an animation, and this attribute is that it's a positional change. And then you just tell it to go, from one position to another position, how long it should take, are you repeating it? There's a couple of other details in there. But what you have is this really straightforward way of saying, I don't have to write a for loop. I don't have to be writing calculations or doing vector math. I can just say, I want my cloud to move from one side of the sky to the other, and then repeat. So once I had gotten the stage taken care of, I had two skyboxes that I switch between when I have my normal blue sky when you're on the stage, and then switching in and out of the sky that uses this 360 photos. This is really helpful because it's literally one line here of code that's saying, I have a 360 photo that I took with this camera, put it into my web application. And it does that. Right now, that one by default was hidden by false because you can assign other attributes that you normally would with DOM elements, and you can interact with those in the JavaScript, which you'll see in just a minute. So I'm not going to go through every single one of the components that I built for this site, but you can see here I've kind of separated out each of these sections into different areas. So we have the title slide, which was my giant face sitting there with the title of the talk. And I have a couple of other different types of AFrame components in here. I have a curved image. When you're building VR experiences, curved images tend to be a little bit easier on the eye because everything is ideally at the same distance, and you're not trying to look at an experience where the middle is closer to you than the edges. So I use that. It's built in. I only use that for the first picture because it was kind of weird to have curved consoles when you're reading stuff. But you have a lot of flexibility in how you're building that. And then I'm adding in these specific components that I wrote myself. So in this case, the blue boxes in the scene all have a component that does some action when they're clicked. So I'm going to go ahead and say I've got highlighted here this click, hide, start component that I've assigned to the box. And I'm going to go ahead and switch into my page components.js file and show exactly what those components look like in JavaScript. So what I'm doing here is I'm registering different components to different parts of my application depending on what I want to be showing. And so for my click, hide, start component, I call aframe.registerComponent, I initialize the function, and then I say, here's an event. When I click, do this thing. And it does that thing. So in this case, it's just simply editing the attributes on the panels, so it's showing and hiding things. When I do the video, I have some ability to play the video, so I can get that this is actually a video component, and then just call video.play on it. The components are smart like that. And that's about all that I needed to do, was think about what I wanted to kind of accomplish as I was walking through this scene, and then write little snippets of code to do that. So what we have is a 175-line index.html page and less than 100 lines of JavaScript to accomplish a VR website that will run just about anywhere, either in VR mode or not. And of course, I'm excluding all of the minified JavaScript because that would throw off the line counts a lot. So when we look at this, I personally am excited. I hope you are too. But I get really excited about the potential that this has for integrating with other things that the web already has in place. So we've been building up over the past several decades, but specifically in the last few years, very intelligent applications and experiences and technologies that are connectivity first. They're driven by the ability to communicate and network with other applications and APIs. And pulling all of this together into VR experiences, the web makes that super easy because that's what it's built to do. You can accomplish a lot of this stuff with game engines, but that's not like what its first goal was. Whereas the web was kind of built to be constantly communicating with other components. And when you think about that in terms of VR, and you think about that in terms of being able to pull down, photo data from Flickr to create photo galleries of different things, or being able to access, endpoints of a big data application that's processing a lot of powerful stuff on the cloud, you start to see a lot of capabilities to build these really rich interactive experiences that are frankly already there, just in lots of little pieces. So one of the things that I got distracted this week doing, as I want to do, is I started playing around with Electron to see how this would look in a desktop form. And I will go ahead and put my standard disclaimer. I learned NPM 2 days ago to figure out how to run Electron on this device. And I pretty much just added 2 lines of code to a sample project, and we'll hide this here because I just use the default for everything. And then I have an Electron application that's running my AFrame app that I wrote over this past week. And unfortunately, I have done a little bit of research, and this doesn't work in VR mode right now because it's built on an older version of Chromium. But as I mentioned, the WebVR spec is going to be built into the default versions of the browser sometime by the end of this year, in which case I don't see too much preventing this from being a way to write desktop VR applications using web technologies. And I'm super excited about that. I've been playing around with it. I don't know a lot about Node, like I mentioned, as I installed it 2 days ago. But I think that there's just so much potential for being able to be creative about how we're building these experiences and how they're running. Of course, there are downsides to a lot of things, and in this case, performance is probably still the biggest issue. We are used to 30 to 60 frames being good enough, and with VR, you're really aiming for 75 on the low end to 120 if you're being like really, really performant, and that's really hard. I'm actually surprised that my computer isn't making a ton of noise right now, because when I was working on this for 8 hours in a day, it tends to get a little bit noisy. But I've started to see more and more opportunities for that to improve, and examples of people who are building experiments that actually do run in the browser at 90 frames per second, which is performant enough for VR. So I have a feeling that that's something that's going to be a non-issue within the next couple of months. And it's fun to be playing with this now because you're kind of getting ahead of it. Like, oh yeah, like, that's not even in the spec yet, in the standard, but it's really cool and it's coming. You also get a lot of extra features around, the gamepad API or web audio and how you can play with all of this in your applications to create these really immersive websites that previously couldn't exist. And being at that kind of forefront right now where you're literally building things that couldn't have existed like 2 years ago is awesome. So with that, I want to pull up the link that I so calmly didn't have available. So let's see if I can just pull up my backup slides. I did have backup slides in case everything just decided it didn't want to work. Let's see, I think that was on my desktop. Now we'll wait for this to load up. And I'm just going to skip all of this part and go straight to the end. Build something awesome. So like I said, there's a lot out there right now. This is still super new technology, but it's moving really fast and it's moving really, really impressively. I think like last week, OSVR, the open source VR framework, started supporting WebVR. Every week, basically something new happens where I'm like, oh, cool, something new to play with. So if you want to learn more, I've been basically compiling all of the resources I can find building for VR in general up here on GitHub under a repository called LearnVR. I am Miss Livy Rose just about everywhere, so if you want to follow someone on Twitter who tweets more than humanly possible about virtual and augmented and mixed reality, that's me there. There's so much new stuff that's happening all the time. You can export to WebVR from game engines now, which is also just a new way of building things. And what we're doing is really starting to see the time in VR's history where anybody can pick up a project and start building on it and have something to show in like half an hour, which I think is really, really cool. So with that, I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. Does that sound about right?
Yep.
With the timing? Yeah. So, and thank you so much. If you can tell, I really love VR. And anytime I get to talk about it, I get really excited. So please ask away.
Let's give Liv a big hand. So now that we actually have the time, is there any questions in terms of WebVR, anything? Okay, we have one already. That's cool.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. So WebVR for mixed reality, do you know if that's coming? Of course, I'm thinking specifically of the HoloLens. Maybe you have some insights there.
I don't have any specific information about different platforms with WebVR. There are a couple of things with mixed reality that I've seen. There are a few camera pass-through experiences that you can pull up now and you can access like the webcam or the camera on a phone and do that kind of pass-through mixed and augmented reality. I've also seen, not entirely the same, but I've seen there's a virtual reality experience called AltSpace that does mixed reality within VR by letting you write WebVR holograms in this VR space. So you get to this point where you have the AR and MR layer on top of a VR experience. I have seen examples of people creating mixed reality experiences with WebVR and AFrame, but I don't have anything specific about any particular device.
Is there any other questions? I don't see any hands. Nope.
Nope, there's one over there.
All right, the one over there. I'm running.
Hello.
First off, it was awesome, cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Very inspiring. I was I think there's a lot of potential in the VR, but I see also, I think I'm not really sure. I just wanted to hear your opinion about it. When you're generalizing and maybe WebVR, you maybe lose some of the immersion you have with the HTC Vive because you have with your hands and what are your thoughts? Because you can't really do that here because you make it for all the devices.
Yeah, so I can't do that here because I don't have a Vive with me as much as I would love to bring it. WebVR does support full room scale virtual reality systems, the tracked hand controllers it uses. I didn't go too deep into the specifics of how the WebVR API is implemented, but what they'll generally do is they have this kind of catch-all called a VR device object, and that's going to be the headset. It's also going to be any controllers that are attached, any lighthouse systems that are attached. So you actually do get that support with WebVR and the ability to do room scale stuff. I haven't personally built something with those components because it's hard to travel with a Vive. But there are a couple of really good examples that I'll probably be tweeting out later of people who are doing that now.
Cool.